So, Patrick Holford, how do you say your last name?
Holford, it's good.
Holford,
You did
excellent.
well.
Welcome to the Strategic Tech Coaching Podcast.
Pleasure.
This episode is about something that is pretty important, wouldn't you say? Health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I used to live in Dubai, and I got your books in Dubai. And I normally start with this question. Still, I'm in Sweden now, but I start with this question: have you been to any of the sky bars in Dubai? Like, you know, the tall buildings, the bars up.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
So I want you to pretend that you and me, we are in the lift in going to Sky Bar, and there's a third guy there, and he doesn't know who you are, and he asks, "So what do you do?" And what would you say?
Well, I help people transform their health. I help people discover the full energy, mental clarity, positive attitude, and obviously freedom from disease. That's my job.
Excellent. So when we go to the bar, I guess we have a healthy, nutritious drink. No alcohol in that drink.
Well, something, but you know, alcohol is not a very good predictor of health. There are a lot of conditions like dementia, heart disease, where having a small amount of alcohol actually puts you at lower risk than having none.
Excellent. So maybe we have a glass of red wine then, or
maybe we will do that. Yeah.
Excellent. So let me first ask about your background. Like, how do you? Because you've been doing this for a long time, and I have 3 of your books.
Yeah.
And how many books have you written?
Well, I've probably written 60, but in print there are 45 in 30 languages. Yeah.
So you're number 2 on most books written on this podcast, and the other guy is Jeff Thompson, a Brit, and he has more than 60 books. So you're number 2 on total, and that's a good achievement because I have a lot of professors on this podcast.
Okay.
So how did you get into this? Where did it start? Your interest in this topic?
Well, I've been interested in what life is all about and the full experience that we can have as human beings, actually since my teenage years. Because I had a number of experiences. I mean, if you could call it like mystical experiences, awakening experiences that happened to me in my teenage years. And funnily enough, one of them was actually vaccine induced. It's true. I was heading to India. I've studied Indian philosophy and Tibetan philosophy and all sorts of different approaches. And I was heading to India as a young man, you know, to find the meaning of life and all that sort of stuff. And I went to the doctor to get hepatitis B vaccine. It's called gamma globulin. And I got home and I was sitting in the floor of my bedroom, and suddenly I was no longer in my body, so to speak. I had an experience of the total connection and the absolute energy that connects, you know, the entire kind of universe. Isn't that strange? And then suddenly, I mean, really, I touched infinity and eternity, what we would call a peak experience. And then I'm back on the floor in my room. Now, I did very well in maths and economics, so I was heading to university to study maths and economics. But after this and a few other experiences, I realized I wanted to know about our full experience. So I studied psychology. Now, I have to say that experimental psychology, mine was the first degree that got a BSc. Before that, it was a Bachelor of Arts. So it was very sort of strong on the science. But in truth, you know, the mystics and masters over the years have already delved a lot deeper than our modern psychology had. So it was a little bit lame, but very strong on neurochemistry and the brain. So I got really interested in the brain, and 2 areas particularly. One was the most severe mental illness, schizophrenia, which affects 1 in 100, and one was intelligence. I figured if we could solve schizophrenia, it would be a big achievement. And if we could get more intelligence, that would be great. I noticed on one of my posts recently, someone said, shame there isn't a vaccine against stupidity. You know?
Yeah.
So, and then I came across the most extraordinary research of a man called Professor Abram Hoffer, who was the director of psychiatric research in Canada. And he had basically effectively treated thousands of schizophrenic patients using a megadose vitamin approach. And he actually published the first ever double-blind placebo-controlled trial where one group got B vitamins, the other got placebo, and the results were brilliant. So I kind of canceled, well, I was sort of intending to go in the direction of psychotherapy, but I jumped on a plane and met Abram Hoffer and became his student. And he worked with an amazing man called Dr. Linus Pauling. And Dr. Linus Pauling is the only man ever to have won 2 unshared Nobel prizes. He also had, by the time I met him, 48 PhDs. And he was a buddy of Einstein. Basically, he understood what Einstein was saying and applied it to chemistry. And that's what he got. All of modern chemistry is based on Linus Pauling's work. He very, very nearly, he should have, it's another story, I won't tell the whole thing here, got the Nobel Prize for DNA structure. He was the first guy to work out how genes cause disease, in sickle cell anemia. And he went on to talk about how the environment affects our genetics, which is a whole new field of epigenetics. I mean, the guy, Einstein, was asked, "Are you a genius?" He said, "If you want a real genius, it's Linus Pauling." So at the age of about 60 or early 50s, he runs into Abraham Hoffer. He discovers vitamin C. And I didn't really realize this fully until a bit later, but there are a couple of things about vitamin C that is totally fascinating. And one is that all animals make it. Your dogs, cats, rats, goats, sheep, reindeer, whatever it is, they make it. And the only animals that don't are primates, and also guinea pig and fruit-eating bat. And most bats actually don't make vitamin C. And there's a few other, there's a couple of Amazonian fish who don't, but all animals make vitamin C. And the animals that make it make a lot. And also the animals who make it are very, very resistant to viral infections. Any viral infection, be it polio, Ebola, HIV, COVID, you name it. And also they are very, very resistant to cancer. And it's a terribly simple molecule, ascorbic acid. It's actually made in all plants from fructose, all animals from glucose. If you take a goat, my body weight, it's making about 5 or 6 grams a day. A gram is 20 supermarket oranges. It'll bump up its production to over 20 grams, 15 grams. I mean, massive amounts when under viral attack. All animals do this. And they always keep their blood level of vitamin C even between 60 and
regardless of what they eat, regardless of the diet, they make it.
Yeah, basically, they make it, exactly. And they always keep their sort of blood level nice and even. So what happens is when you're under stress or viral attack, or very relevant in this case, sepsis, which we'll talk about in relation to COVID, because no one actually dies of the virus. That's terribly important. They die of the immune system overreacting against dead virus particles, which triggers a process called sepsis. So bacterial sepsis is septicemia, blood poisoning, etc. The immune system goes haywire. And under those conditions of stress or viral attack, the adrenal glands, and this is, I find, really fascinating, store vitamin C at about 100 times greater concentration than, for example, your muscles or your red blood cells. And they actually release vitamin C into the bloodstream and raise it, maybe tenfold. So basically, an animal, well, all of us store vitamin C in the adrenal glands, and provided we've got it in there, we will release it when we're under attack. But I think what's actually happening in COVID is that people are, basically, if you're healthy and you do the right thing, and we'll talk about that, many people are asymptomatic. For many, it's a mild to moderate flu or infection. Yep. It's a very small percentage where it gets more serious. And if you don't clear this infection in the first week, it's going to move into your lungs. And then if you don't clear it in the second week, you can end up with enough dead virus particles that it triggers the immune system to overreact. And suddenly your temperature's soaring, you can't breathe. This is the critical condition. And I work with a number of intensive care units all over the world, in China, America, the UK. And they've learned very simply how to make this a non-fatal disease. And the answer, in effect, there's a bit more to it than this, but in essence, what they do is they give somebody in a critical condition intravenous vitamin C, which effectively is exactly what any animal that makes vitamin C would do, plus steroids, because the adrenal glands release cortisol, the stress hormone, which is the most powerful anti-inflammatory, and they give anticoagulants. So basically, they're kind of sort of mimicking what the body would do if it wasn't depleted. And we've learned that the steroids and the vitamin C work together. And the ICUs, intensive care units doing this, have had no deaths in anyone who doesn't already have an end-stage disease like cancer or liver cirrhosis or whatever, and over 85. So the first general myth is that this is a fatal disease. I just got my invitation to have a vaccine today from the National Health Service. And, it says 1 in 10 over 75, can die from this virus. But it's not true, if you do the right thing at the beginning and if you do the right thing in treatment. So Linus Pauling just really spent the last 39 years of his life studying nothing but vitamin C chemistry, viruses, and cancer. And in the 1970s, he had really established that if you do what an animal does, which is increase your vitamin C intake a lot as soon as you get the symptoms of a cold, until the symptoms go away, which shouldn't take too long, then you're fine. And he actually put that sort of advice on the front cover of his book on colds and flu in the 1970s. And he was amazed because he made so many scientific discoveries, and he said, usually new ideas get attacked, they get challenged, the science gets done on them, and eventually he says it usually takes about 10 years for a new idea to come through. But it just hasn't happened with vitamin C and nutrition. And he ended up reaching the conclusion that it's because the pharmaceutical industry is so powerful. It's a $1 trillion industry. And in effect, it has such sort of strong roots and control now, not over the medical profession, but also over governments. And vitamin C is dirt cheap. It's not patentable. It's just 4 chemical reactions away from glucose. You can make it so easily. And it's got such wide-reaching implications, not just for viruses, but viruses, inflammation, infection, cancer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That in a sense, it's the biggest enemy to pharma because it could replace the need for an awful lot of medications. So here we are in this crazy situation where there's tons of research. I'll give you an example of one study, right? And this will sort of kind of blow the mind of many people listening, but it's just a fact. It's all published. But basically, the Chinese already knew that vitamin C worked because they'd used it in the SARS epidemic previously. So when COVID came along, one of the leading universities in Wuhan, the Zhongnan University Hospital, headed by Professor Xiong Peng, set up immediately, the first world trial of a randomized placebo-controlled trial. And what they did in these early days, they had critical patients on mechanical ventilators, most of whom you kind of would expect would die. And they gave effectively half of them placebo, sterile water in the drip, and half of them intravenous vitamin C, 12 grams twice a day, 24 grams. And among the most critically ill patients, 80% less died. And in the body, you measure inflammation. So there's blood tests for inflammation. And those on the placebo had a level of like 160. And those on the vitamin C had a level of, I think it was 18 or 19. And then you measure oxygenation and, which basically lung function, pulmonary function, way better on the vitamin C. And I asked, this study is all out, it's all published, it's there.
When did they publish this?
Well, funny enough, I knew the results in May. And it got published in December. So it took a very, very long time to actually get out. And and I was advised, well, number one, what I did in October myself was we had over 100 studies now on vitamin C. And some, really, there's some very, very obviously logical things here, right? So the first thing is we know that when you're under viral attack, if you want to get your white blood cells, your immune cells, your T cells, to the normal level of vitamin C that they have when you're not under attack, you've got to take several grams. So even if you don't talk above anything beyond effectively correcting deficiency, you want more. By the way, almost all COVID critical patients coming into hospital and certainly into ICUs are vitamin C deficient, and the level of vitamin C predicts their survival. It actually predicts their survival. So to give an example, one of the top ICUs in London was giving vitamin C 1 or 2 grams a day, which I would consider not enough. And I said to the head of research there, how do you know you're giving enough if you don't test? And she, a lovely lady, Dr. Marcella Vizcachipi, she said, you're right. So I gave her these vitamin C urine sticks, very simple. You know, the patient arrives in your hospital, they pee into a jar, you dip the stick in, you can see it's kind of green, and it should turn yellow because we are all designed, all animals excrete, they make enough vitamin C and excrete a little extra in the urine. And she started to test and found that many people needed 6 grams to just be registering vitamin C in the urine. So it's sort of, it's kind of a no-brainer just to do that. But nutrition is just kind of, it's terribly bizarre because if you look at your immune system, there are 2 parts to it. There's the innate, your innate immunity. And then there's your kind of learnt or acquired immunity. And when you get exposed to coronavirus, your immune system will learn to produce antibodies. So next time it comes along, you can, get into action faster. That's what a vaccine does. It teaches you, learnt immunity. But then there's innate immunity, which is totally dependent on things like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, etc. And if you take zinc, vitamin D, everyone knows, you in Sweden and certainly here in the UK, we're in the flu zone. All the predictions of what would happen in equatorial Africa were just completely wrong. It was meant to be devastating. But if you go to Kenya or Ghana or, those equatorial countries where there's loads of vitamin D from sunlight production, their mortality is really, really low. So, we ask the question, why do we get flu and colds starting in October, peaking in December, January, February, and then it's all gone by April? And the answer is it tracks absolutely vitamin D levels, which tracks a little bit behind because it takes a while for you to run out. It tracks sun exposure. So then we start to look at what's the COVID incidence, of people in relation to vitamin D. And it's just very obvious. If you've got a high blood vitamin D, your risk is a fraction of a low level. And now there have been 2 studies where they've given the most potent or hormonal form of vitamin D because we make it in the skin, it acts on cholesterol, takes a little while. What we eat is not quite the finished product yet. It has to be converted into something called calcifidiol. And in 2 hospital studies, they gave a massive dose of calcifidiol to COVID patients. And suddenly, there's very, very few converting to severe COVID, getting into the intensive care units and dying. So why we ignore half of all of immunity, and put all our money into vaccines, lockdowns, masks, et cetera, makes no sense unless you know absolutely nothing about nutrition.
Yeah. Would you say that the majority of the people are automatically vitamin C and vitamin D deficient, or should they do a test? Or is it just like take the supplements? Or
well, funny enough,
they should do a test first to see if they are deficient.
Well, in the ideal way, you want to get your blood level up to what's called at least 75 nanomole per liter, or 100 is better, 100 nanomole per liter. And most people in the UK are below 50, and there's lots who are like at 20. And that would be, generally would be sort of true for, that flu zone. Funny enough, Scandinavian countries, you'd predict would have worse vitamin D status, but they're not so bad because they're a lot more aware. They know in the winter that they need to supplement, vitamin D. You get a little bit from oily fish as well, but really you got to supplement vitamin D in the winter. So Scandinavian countries who are supplementing tend to do better. So yeah, you can either take something like 3,000 international units a day. And by the way,
2,500 I take a day. So
perfect. Yeah,
you think that's enough, or?
Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And also, by the way, if you forget, you can take 2,500 7 times once a week at 7 times the dose because it stores in the body.
Interesting. So, would you continue to take this over the summer, or just?
You probably don't need quite so much, and that's where it's not a bad idea if you can to get a couple of vitamin D tests because we are different. And the darker the skin, the less you make, the more overweight you are, the less you make, the older you are, the less you make, and maybe some people make more than others. So in a sense, at some point in your life, measure your vitamin D just to, I mean, I got a bit of a surprise because I was in Kenya for a month and I assumed that my vitamin D level would be really good. And I was just under 75, even despite supplementing, something like 1,000 IUs. So it kind of woke me up to increasing it. And also vitamin D, it's quite important. If you suddenly take it because you've got symptoms, it's kind of too late because it takes 3 to 4 days to become active. So during the winter, you just want to make sure absolutely that your vitamin D is above 75.
Is that a blood test, or what kind of test do you do?
It's a blood test.
Okay.
It's a blood test. You can't measure it in urine, unfortunately, and it costs about $30, something like that. It's not too much, and of course it's a little bit inconvenient, but it's worth. And even if you're taking 2,500 IUs a day, that's what you do regularly, and it's now the winter, get a test, and you might go, oh, my level's 100, I'm fine. Or you might go, oh, my level is only 65. Maybe it's not quite enough,
Okay.
It doesn't really matter if you take a bit too much, but it obviously matters if you take too little.
Vitamin C takes 500. Is that a reasonable dose, or what's your recommendation?
It is a reasonable dose. I take 2 grams. I take 1 gram or 1,000 milligram in the morning, and I take 1,000 milligram in the evening. But 500 is reasonable on the science. Linus Pauling, who also became the founder of my Institute for Optimum Nutrition. So in the early 80s, when I was sort of in my 20s, I realized that we needed to study not just the amount of nutrition that stops scurvy, where your teeth fall out and gums fail to bleed and so on. And by the way, we're measuring scurvy levels in a very large amount of critical COVID patients. So it's a virally induced scurvy. But the amount that's, optimum. And he worked out that the RDA, which is the ridiculous dietary arbitrary, the thing that you read on the cornflakes packet, so to speak, he thought it should be 2 grams. And I know the basis of that. So that's kind of a good daily optimum. I don't see the point in taking more than that just because we're all worried about COVID. However, and here's the big difference. And when I get the first sign of a cold, I want to take basically 1 gram an hour or 1 gram every 2 hours, which is pretty much what an animal does. Now, in also what works, and this is well established, is zinc, but you've got to get above 60, 70 milligrams to have a very profound antiviral effect. And those of you who've been following the sort of COVID news will know that zinc is a very powerful antiviral agent, but there's something about the SARS-CoV-2 virus that tries to stop it getting inside to cells. So the controversial anti-malaria drug hydroxychloroquine that Trump mentioned, for better or worse, actually it does drive zinc into cells. And there's something else called quercetin in red onions that does. I take in the UK, I formulated a vitamin C for a company. It's called Immune C, and never mind, doesn't matter whose you take, but there's 3 milligrams of zinc and 1 gram of vitamin C in each tablet. So if I take, I want to take 1 an hour, but obviously we're going to sleep. You don't want to wake up every hour. So in truth, you end up taking 20 an hour, 20 grams in a day. What I do is I go to sleep and then I'd wake up in the night and take a couple of pills. And that 20 is plus 3 milligrams gives me 60 milligrams of zinc. I take 10 in my multi. I'm up to the optimal zinc dose. Now, I can't be sure that I had COVID, but I've been working. I've had reasonable high exposure because I'm interacting with these intensive care units. And suddenly in June, I'm hit with this very strong flu, which my temperature soars. I've got a fever. I'm aching. My throat, etc., etc. So it could have been another flu, but it's kind of weird in the middle of June, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what I did. And as is quite normal, in this case, about 18 hours, suddenly the fever breaks. It usually happens, I found this so often, that you actually get some sort of kind of cold sweat, the fever breaks, it's over, end of story. and within a few hours, you're feeling absolutely fine. And I've been through many, well, not many, but a few flus in my life, very, very strong viral infections. I've followed this strategy and it works. Now, if you look at the evidence, because unfortunately there aren't randomized controlled trials on a gram an hour, but in the studies on 8 grams a day during viral infection, during the first day of viral infection, you get 46% of people are symptom-free within 24 hours. And broadly speaking, if you widen the net, because not all studies, getting quick enough, on that 8 gram a day dose, you've got 20% shorter infection. And that might mean, 1.5 to 2 days, because most people are infected for 8 days, and you might reduce that to 6 or whatever it happens to be. I think in most cases, you can get rid of this within 48 hours. And the point about that is the quicker you get rid of it, the less dead virus particles there are. And it's that accumulation of dead virus particles that leads to the critical COVID phase where the immune system attacks. So I think if you know what to do, it's calmed down now, but almost, during these peak first and second wave phases, there isn't a single day where someone is not contacting me on Facebook or email or phone or whatever, who's in the middle of, COVID. And I tell them what to do. And I mean, actually, a friend of mine, an Asian fellow with asthma, he kind of got it and recovered, didn't recover. He just sort of dribbled on, and then suddenly, wham, he can't breathe. He's off to hospital. And I rang up the hospital and said, stick in 3 grams intravenous vitamin C, which they did. And within 48 hours, he was out again. And the thing that, well, there's many things that break my heart. The first is that people are dying, they don't need to. The second is that nobody knows this. But for those who do know it, who've read it in my book or whatever, what tends to happen is they get sick and they take a couple of grams. Maybe they take a couple more. But actually, the learning here, I start immediately with 3 grams. So it's like a loading dose. I'm trying to get my blood level immediately high and then keep it high without a break. Vitamin C is in and out in 4 hours. So, you could maybe take a dose every 3 hours, or certainly 2 grams every 2 hours would be fine. But I'm absolutely aiming to keep my vitamin C maximum in my bloodstream until the symptoms go away. And by the way, when the symptoms go away, you sort of forget, it's like, if you're still suffering, take another gram. And the worst thing that can happen is you get loose bowels, which is really not a big deal. If you take more than you need. Some say the amount that you should take is up to the point that gives you loose bowels and then down some. But it's dirt cheap. It's very safe. We should all have some vitamin C, ideally, and some zinc, available. And
this should be, everyone should know this around the world. I mean, this is what the newspapers should be writing about. This is what the government should be talking about. No?
Well, here's the crazy thing. China knows it. So what happened on February the 2nd, and none of this is all published, there's just no question about it, is they sent in a truck, and I've got a picture of the truck, I've got the delivery note, I've got everything, with 50 tons of vitamin C on it. And they even had a banner, saying, we from such and such province are with you guys. And 50 tons is 50 million doses. And they distributed that 50 million grams to everybody who had COVID in hospitals. They gave it to all the workers in hospitals, and they started giving it intravenously to the people in the intensive care units. And when I spoke just before, last time I spoke to Professor Zhong Peng in November, I think, or just before his paper was out. And I said, how is it in Wuhan, in your hospital? And he said, I have not had a single COVID patient in my intensive care unit since May last year. Not one, and how the mainstream media, suppress this. It's extraordinary.
It's amazing.
And it's been, we've had so many articles, in major newspapers just culled at the last minute. And when Zhong Peng's study came out, I mean, this is what people are saying. give me a randomized placebo-controlled trial on COVID. And by the way, this effect on vitamin C was bigger than the effect of steroids, which are now recognized because of the randomized placebo-controlled trial. And when that study was about to come out, and we had people who were, going into hospital with COVID, given intravenous vitamin C, getting better. We had heads of ICUs, interviewed, willing to talk about how it was reducing mortality. We had a professor of nutrition, we had a professor of pharmacology from Oxford University, we had professor of public health, Harry Hemela from Finland, genius, he knows everything about vitamin C. We had everything you could ever want. Human interest story, randomized trial, 80% less deaths. And it was a very happy day and then a sad day, because on Saturday, this is about in December, at 6 p.m., I was told there's going to be a full page in the Mail on Sunday and in the Sunday Mirror, which are our biggest read papers. And when I bought the papers in the morning, culled. Oh. So there is an extraordinary, I've never seen it before.
So they had journalists write the articles, but then you got stopped higher up.
Yeah. So we're talking about journalists commissioned by their health editors to do the piece, and they've still got to pay the journalists. It's like a kill fee. So, everything's yes. Last minute, no.
Wow. That's so sad,
it's the third time it's happened. And, the reality is that people are dying.
Yeah, exactly.
Who don't need to. That is the absolute bottom line. Here in the UK, I don't know how it is in Sweden, but we've got the National Institute of Clinical Excellence who advise doctors what to do, and we've got Public Health England who tell the government what to do, and they've both got their scientific advisory groups, and we've been feeding them all the studies on vitamin D and vitamin C and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and why on earth they can't take the time to just, even if they reported we've looked at the studies and there's no effect, at least they would be doing their job. That isn't the case. And then recently, to give you an example of the incredible suppression of this, there was a study, in some ways not a bad study. It gave 8 grams of vitamin C to infected COVID patients. And it said 50 milligrams of zinc gluconate, which sounds like a lot, but actually there's only 7 milligrams of zinc. I said you've got to get up to 70 milligrams, so it was a tenth of the dose. The zinc didn't work. And what they did was these were outpatients who had a PCR test and were then enrolled on the trial and given the vitamin C. Now, my logic is that if I got sick, I wouldn't go to the outpatient on day 1, probably not on day 2, probably not on day 3 or 4. But if I'm really starting to feel sick, I'm going to go. And whether I've gone and got a PCR test or the hospital does it, it's going to take some time. And as I said, vitamin C really works if you take it from the moment of infection. That's really makes a massive difference. So we don't know how long. And I asked the authors of the study, how long? And they said, well, we have that information, but it's not. And then they said, we won't disclose it. It's like if you're a doctor and someone comes to you and they say, I'm having this terrible temperature. They say, how long have you had it? First question, you write it down. It's not so difficult. Anyway, the study actually got, when you do a study, you have peer reviewers. So you have independent experts. And I've since learned the study got turned down at the first journal because they're not doing the proper statistics, and among other things. And anyway, the study then comes out in the Journal of the American Medical Association, showing that the vitamin C guys are better in 5.2 days, and the non-vitamin C guys take 6.7 days. So it's about 1.5 day less sickness, which is really important.
Yeah.
And they say it's not statistically significant. And then
the hospitals are full. That's pretty good if people can come home earlier.
Well, absolutely. And then Professor, actually Harry Hemela from Finland, he analyzes the actual data and shows that there was a 71% statistically significant improved rate of recovery on vitamin C versus the placebo. And normally in science, you then can post your comment or your critique. There's a process. If a study comes out, you can critique it, gets published. They wouldn't publish it. And then we had another top professor, right, the most, eloquent and, very, politically sensitive critique, wouldn't publish it. So, and then the journal did a whole press release on it, and it hits the news saying proof vitamin C doesn't work. So there is this extraordinary resistance in the mainstream media and even in the science, but not in the scientists. So we launched in December, we launched a website internationally called www.vitaminc4covid.com. It doesn't matter if you've used the number 4 or 4, vitaminc4covid.com. And we've had, I think, almost 900 professors, doctors, scientists, nutritionists, etc., sign our petition, which has 7 points. One is for governments to actually review the evidence, and the last one is for intensive care units to use the intravenous vitamin C, which is a bit more medical. And also, one of the points is to stop Facebook and social media classifying vitamin C and COVID as false information. Because I mean, to give an example, I did an interview with the professor in China and Professor Harry Hemmeler in Finland, and the Professor Paul Marek, who has no mortality, is one of the top emergency medicine professors in the States. I just interviewed experts and put it up on YouTube, taken down, false information. So there is, I mean, I don't know if it's still there. I think it probably is, but if you put in vitamin C and COVID, there's an algorithm that finds that, and it's just ridiculous. Yeah. So yes, we started this campaign, and please sign it for those of you who are listening. Absolutely,
we put a link to in the episode, so you can just click it. If you listen to this, you can just click it directly, and I think on there also it was the recommendations how much C vitamins you should take, and
these things. So it's all in there. Yeah,
exactly. So we talked about C vitamin, we talked about D vitamin. Anything else that people can do? Because I feel there's a lot of fear for people about COVID. So what else? Because I know it's not only, it's the whole concept, like it's the mind as well. So what else do you recommend for people?
Well, I mean, actually, funnily enough, did you ever see that amazing film, The Manchurian Candidate?
Yeah, I heard about it. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about this the other day, because basically, if you want to interrogate someone and break them down, you have to threaten the 3 fundamental instincts. The first is your instinct of survival. So, it's the fear of death. And the second is your relations instinct. And that is, your social group. Who am I with, et cetera, et cetera. And the third is your ability to adapt. What's going on. So if you suddenly have a situation where people are socially isolated, all the media says you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And you don't know when lockdown is going to end and when your business is going to, all the rest of it. You're basically freaked out.
Yeah, and at that point, all the boxes.
Exactly. And at that point, you're really, you can really be manipulated very easily and told what to do. And, I'm sure that whether that's intentional or not, the fact of the matter is that people are living in this massive fear. And it's actually not like that. The number of people who, for example, currently in the UK, on the PCR tests, well, or on studies, we've got 0.5% of people would test positive. It may be less because people who go for tests are usually going because they got symptoms or they got concerns. But anyway, at the most, 1 in 100 test positive. I just looked at a healthcare worker study, several thousand healthcare workers. Of those who test positive, almost half are asymptomatic. And there's a smaller percentage, maybe 40%, who get mild symptoms. I don't think in that study there was one who ended up in hospital or ICU. But, we're saying of those, 1 in 100 who test positive or less, this if you're just, I mean, I don't know the health workers are healthy. I mean, they've obviously got high exposure, you know, but we assume they're younger. But, you know, at the very most, you know, one of those is going to end up, you know, in hospital. And then I've been tracking mortality in the UK in the intensive care units. It was like 40% the first wave, 30% the second wave. It should be below 5% if they were being treated right. So, you know, and when you do all the maths, you know, for somebody your age, for example, in reasonable health, what you find is the risk of dying of COVID is about, you know, the same sort of risk of dying in a road traffic accident. So it's really not that great. And I think one thing, and I write a COVID news every month, and my COVID news for March actually models what's going to happen with vaccines in relation to two things. One is death, reducing death risk, and reducing transmissibility risk. So one of the myths that people don't seem to understand about vaccines, it doesn't stop you getting infected. It just means that your immune system will kick into action faster, and even faster if you've got enough vitamin C and D. So we don't know how long someone who's been vaccinated and become infected will transmit. And my assumption is 2 days. But the same thing happens with vitamin C and vitamin D, because they shorten duration. We know that they are associated with more people being asymptomatic. The general assumption is if you are asymptomatic, your immune system's beaten the virus before you have much, you know, viral particles. So you're also less likely to transmit. So both a nutritional strategy and a vaccine strategy reduces transmission, you know, reduces deaths. But of course, you know, one is being ignored and the other one is, you know, is taken on board. So you know, if you actually look at the numbers, then maybe you're not so frightened. I personally am not frightened. I know that I could deal with this.
But so, that doesn't make a good headline in the evening newspaper.
Well, no, and the big fear, I mean, the big sort of pitch. So, I mean, you got to remember, and I just, excuse me for being skeptical here, but basically, I knew about 8-9 years ago, because I got the report from a big pharma conference, and the head of one of the companies basically said, there's no more money in blockbuster drugs. We've got nothing in the pipeline. Statins was the last big spinner. You know, there are obviously drugs making money. They were hunting for a dementia drug. It's failed. And I want to tell you something about that because it's really interesting. And it kind of parallels what's going on here. So the head of this particular major company said, the future is vaccines. We've got to put all our energy into vaccines. Vaccines is where the money is. So we've got this $1 trillion industry that can't support its profit base and its shareholders and so on with blockbuster drugs. The future is vaccines. So if you just look, I mean, before Linus Pauling died, he said something to me which has really struck home. And he said, don't worry about the randomized controlled trials, follow the logic. It's the logic that counts. The trials come later. And I realized in life, if you want to find out what's really going on with diabetes, heart disease, dementia, etc., follow the logic. But if you want to find out why we are where we are, just follow the money, and it will show you. And vaccines, effective or ineffective, new variants, new vaccines, more vaccines, every year vaccines, mandatory vaccines, vaccine passports, all of these things, whether they're right or wrong, and I'm not saying that, are great money. You know, they're just really, really profitable. And so it's sort of stupid because I've been in this industry for, you know, health for 45 years or so. And I've seen the lies told about antidepressants and all the rest of it. And, you know, I'm talking about an industry that's had, you know, about $20 billion of fines for fraudulent activity. And, you know, we're talking here about, you know, Pfizer, GSK, AstraZeneca, all the guys that we're talking to now have a very, very bad record of, you know, of twisting things and bribing officials and, you know, changing the whole agenda. And it's sort of bizarre to think that that would suddenly change overnight. So I've got to the point where I'm I'm a bit skeptical.
Yeah.
And I don't, I don't read, it's not the newspaper headlines, it's not the press releases. I just go to the studies and the science and look at it for myself, and then share that information, without a judgment. I say, this is what we're seeing on vaccines. They do seem to be, working quite well. And, the vitamins and all the rest of it, so people can make up their own mind. But that's the situation that we're in now. And I think that it's probable, this is a judgment, a prediction, but I would expect vaccines are going to turn out to be, 50% effective, plus or minus 20%. If we get to the point where they're 80% effective, that's brilliant and amazing. It's probably unlikely. It's never happened with a flu vaccine. Coronaviruses mutate all the time, and there'll be many more variants. This is not sort of suddenly going to go away. So it's not going to give you that 100%, protection that you want. So it makes total sense to also know about vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D. And you asked what else. I mean, I think that I've just done a podcast myself on long COVID. Here's my book, Flu Fighters. I do talk about quercetin, which is a nutrient you can get in the health food store that makes zinc work even better. So quercetin's interesting. It's in red onions. There's lots of foods, from butternut squash to red onions to garlic. There's all sorts of things that work. Berries are fantastic at this time of year. Exercise is very important. But one thing I will say about exercise is every now and again I hear about some super fit, marathon runner or something who comes, young, who comes down with COVID quite badly. And it doesn't surprise me, because when under physiological stress, you use up vitamin C really quickly. So the more you exercise, the more you need. So if you had just run a marathon and you're not in the mindset of taking lots of vitamin C, and you then get exposed to, in case you don't know, when you want to do cold studies, one of the populations you look for are long distance runners, marathon runners, because an extraordinary number get colds after events. Right? So
that's really interesting, because yesterday I had a discussion with my father, and we were meeting outside, and we were discussing this, and I said, if you're healthy, you don't have to worry about COVID. And he said, well, I've seen a lot of elite athletes that get long-term COVID. And so this is exactly what you're saying.
The more you exercise, the more you need. That is really the absolute critical point.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, so this book that you have written, The 10 Secrets of 100% Healthy People, is one of my favorite books when it comes to living a healthy life. And I think it's the only book that you need, actually. It covers,
I agree.
It covers everything. So I wanted to talk more about this book, but we have to do it some other time, because I know we're running out of time. But for the listeners, I can really recommend this book that Patrick Holford has written.
But maybe I can add one point, which will wrap things up. So I mentioned dementia earlier, Alzheimer's, okay? So at this exact moment in time, the best drug for Alzheimer's has reduced brain shrinkage by 2% without any clinical dementia benefit. The best nutritional treatment has given high-dose B vitamins, B12, folic acid, and B6, which control a process called methylation. That's very important. And it's found a 52% reduction in brain shrinkage and virtually no further memory loss. But in those people who also had high omega-3, that went up to 73%, no further memory loss, and 30% in this trial were no longer rated clinically with dementia. Excellent. Now, what we've actually spoken about, and this is the teaser, and it's what that book is about, is that there are 6 fundamental processes going on inside you. One is sugar, glycation, your blood sugar. 2 is, we call it lipidations, fats. So omega-3s, really important. Vitamin D is a fat, very important. 3 is methylation, which is to do with B vitamins. It's terribly important, methylation. 4 is oxidation, and that's what vitamin C is. It's an incredibly powerful antioxidant. That's what berries and all those multicolored foods So that's that. And then we have hydration, water, and then we have digestion and absorption. And the essential point, and that's what the book's about, is that if you've got all those processes working correctly, you won't get sick. All of diabetes, heart disease, dementia, cancer, dying from COVID is a breakdown in one or more of those systems. And the biggest problem we have right now in our healthcare systems, they don't have a model of health. If you ask a doctor, what is your model for health? They don't have one. They have a model for treating disease, but they don't have a model of health. And that's kind of it. And you can see when you look at COVID, there's no talking seriously about what makes a strong immune system and why some people survive and other people don't. And that is the bottom line.
And that is the most important question there is, I think. So I'm glad you shared this with us. I have this question I normally end with. So if you had a magic wand and you could teach something to everyone in the world, what would you teach them?
Well, right now it would be this thing about vitamin C. If everyone knew, regardless of governments and media, if everybody knew to have a pot of vitamin C, ideally with some zinc, and when you get the first sign of a cold, just take 1 hour until the cold goes away. I think we would massively change what's happening right now.
Excellent. That's for everyone that is listening around the world. That's some great advice. And go and buy your C vitamins. And you can check out Patrick's website. We'll leave the link in the show notes to the episode. And thank you so much for taking the time. And this is important topics. I mean, health is everything. So
thank you. And do read this book, which is on flufighters.net.
Flufighters.net. Excellent.
Flufighters.net. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That was fun.